Welcome to the Montana Department of Labor and Industry Employment Standards Division's course on overtime compensation and weighted average calculation. In this presentation, we will cover when overtime is due, how to calculate overtime pay, and how holiday, sick, vacation, and PTO affect overtime. Let's get started. Overtime compensation of at least 1.5 times an employee's regular rate of pay is due for all hours worked over 40 in a work week for all non-exempt employees. A work week is a 168-hour or 7-day repeating period. An example would be Sunday through Saturday. So any hours worked during this period over 40 are required to be compensated at a rate of at least time and a half. For example, if a non-exempt employee works 5 8-hour shifts and 1 5-hour shift in a work week, they have a total of 45 hours worked during this work week. 40 of these hours would be at the regular rate of pay, and 5 would be at the overtime rate. The following is an example of how this would be calculated. In this example, the employee's regular rate of pay is $15 per hour. Their overtime rate then is $22.50 per hour, as that is 1.5 times their regular rate of pay. The employee works 45 hours in the work week. 40 of these hours are paid at the regular rate of $15 per hour. 40 times 15 equals $600. 5 of these hours are paid at the $22.50 rate. 5 times $22.50 equals $112.50. In this example, the employee has gross earnings of $712.50 in this work week. This is a fairly simple example to aid in understanding the concept. Let's move on to what it may look like if an employee works for more than one rate of pay. Multiple rates of pay can add a bit of complexity. However, conceptually, it is exactly the same as a single rate of pay. In this example, an employee works their primary position at a rate of $15 per hour. They also work another position for the company. In the secondary position, they earn $18 per hour. In our example, they work 35 hours at the $15 rate and 10 hours at the $18 rate in this particular work week. To calculate overtime and total compensation, we must first determine regular earnings. First, we have 35 hours at $15 per hour. 35 times 15 equals $525. Next, we have 10 hours at $18 per hour. 10 times 18 equals $180. Now, we must add these two totals, 525 plus 180 equals $705. $705 is our regular earnings total. If we divide the regular earnings by the total hours worked, it gives us the regular rate of pay. 705 divided by 45 gives us $15.67 per hour as the regular rate of pay. This is used in determining weighted average overtime compensation. As this is the regular rate of pay, we can simply divide the rate in half to determine the additional value to reach the applicable overtime compensation. $15.67 divided by 2 equals $7.84. $7.84 multiplied by 5, the hours worked over 40, equates to $39.20. $39.20 is the overtime earnings in this example. As $705 was already established as the regular earnings, we simply must add the overtime earnings, $705, plus $39.20 gives us $744.20 as total weekly earnings. This is referred to as weighted average overtime. Alternatively, an employer may choose to pay all overtime based on the highest rate of pay. As payment on an hourly basis is not the only method of compensation, it is important to review how regular rates and overtime rates are determined if an employee is paid by commission, piece rate, or another method of payment. To determine the regular rate of an employee paid on a commission, piece rate, or flat book rate, the total weekly earnings of the employee is divided by the total hours actually worked in the work week. Review of an example would likely be helpful in understanding how this would be applied in the real world. In our example, if an employee, in this case Anne, earned $800 and worked 45 hours, her regular rate of pay would be $17.78 per hour. Anne is entitled to payment of half this regular rate for each hour worked over 40, in addition to the full commission or piecework earnings. In our example, Anne's earnings were $800. We determined $17.78 would be the extrapolated regular hourly rate. $17.78 divided by 2 is $8.89. Anne worked 5 hours over 40 in this work week. 5 times $8.89 equals $44.45. Anne would be due gross wages of $844.45 for this work week. As we are reviewing overtime requirements and weighted average overtime, it is important to understand what truly constitutes hours worked. Holiday, sick, vacation, and PTO are all benefits an employer may or may not provide. However, none of these are truly hours worked. As such, they are not included in the calculation of overtime. As an example, if an employee takes a sick day for one of the 5 days they are scheduled in a work week, the employee then returns to work and works 4 10-hour shifts. The employee is not due any overtime pay. They simply must receive 8 hours of sick pay and 40 hours of regular earnings. The following are helpful resources addressing this and other wage law and employment relationship associated questions. This concludes our presentation on overtime compensation and weighted average calculations. Additional information can also be found on our website. Thank you.